we want in this session is to look into the regional differences when it comes to the practices of diabetes and Ramadan. We had a very good survey published about 12 months ago during the COVID time, covering diabetes and Ramadan for type 2 diabetes and indeed for type 1 diabetes. And I'm very thankful for all the investigators that you see their names here. 250 investigators took part from 20 countries in a survey that indeed was without any funding, without any pharmaceutical support, or indeed any non-profit sector. But the data is really quite overwhelming. And what we want in this session is to look into the regional differences as to understand better what happens during the month of Ramadan. As I mentioned, a total of 20 countries took part, and this Ramadan of 2020, or that Ramadan of 2020, was at the peak of COVID. The survey of type 2 diabetes included 5,865 persons. And the survey took part post-Ramadan. So it took part 10 weeks post-Ramadan from June to August. And it was not just primary care, but primary care and secondary care based. I'm presenting today the data of the Gulf, which in the survey was represented by Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates. Both countries, of course, share a large number of similarities: geographical location, language, religion, lots of political overlap. The culture and the economy and the healthcare structure have lots of similarities. But nevertheless, certainly there are differences. Neighboring countries will have differences, and this is the case globally everywhere. The data from UAE included data from secondary and tertiary care hospitals in Dubai and Al Ain. From Saudi Arabia, it covered a huge number of sectors across the whole country. As you can see from the data here, we have a total from the Gulf region of 1,121 persons, and the split in gender was almost 50-50. As you can see as well, the age of the group is in their mid-50s, and duration of diabetes is about 12 years. When you look into the comorbidities, there is a fair number of people with hypertension and hyperlipidemia, roughly about 60%. Retinopathy is not as high, about 18% in both. Neuropathy is 19%. Nephropathy is only 9%. Macrovascular disease is 15%, with a bit of a difference between one country and the other, perhaps related to the investigators and the type of centers they were included. Diabetic foot, I'm pleased to report that in type 2 diabetes was only reported in 2% of the cohort. Now, when you think of the therapy, well, about 43% in both countries were on sulfonylurea, and almost a similar number were on insulin. Why these two drugs are mentioned? Because of obviously the hypoglycemia impact during the month of Ramadan. Of course, the patients were on all other sorts of medications. Glycemic control was not great. The HbA1c in mean was 8.4%, and roughly about 18% were with good glycemic control of HbA1c below 7. Now, when you look into the fasting decision, you see a big difference between one country and the other. 97% in people in Saudi Arabia fasted or had the intention to fast. So almost 100%, only 3% did not fast, while 17% in UAE decided not to fast. Once they fast, the average number of days is not different, and 80% in Saudi Arabia and 70% in UAE were able to fast the full 30 days without having to break the fast on any particular day. Breaking the fast, their passion to fast even extends beyond Ramadan, where 38% do fast few days on the month after Ramadan, as it is part of the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I mentioned it was COVID time, and COVID did not make people concerned about fasting, 5% were thinking that it is a big problem for them if they fasted because of COVID. Now, I've shown you the data of the prevalence of fasting, but that does not mean that it's a plain sailing. 11% had to break the fast because of diabetes-related illness, not because of travel or for because of any other reasons. 11% because of diabetes-related illness. Hypoglycemia was also roughly about 17%, where it was 20% in Saudi Arabia and 8% in UAE. So perhaps this reflects the level of fasting. So the higher number of people will fast, the higher number of people who will get hypoglycemia. The average number of days of hypos was 3.4 over the month. But it's not just about the average number of days, it's about the frequency itself. So in both countries, the vast majority did have their hypos between 1 to 7 days. So the mean would be about 3.5 or 4 days. But don't forget that here, 23% in UAE and about 7% in Saudi Arabia had had hypos on multiple days, over 8 days, and up to even in some cases every single day of Ramadan. Now, part of the assessment of the severity of the hypos is knowing that the person will indeed break their fast. Many, unfortunately, do not break their fast. And this is something that's related to education, which we need to change. But when you look into the number of people, even in COVID time, where coming even close to the road where the hospital is would be a problem because of COVID, 9% in UAE and really 6% either attended the emergency or the hospital, not from the total, no, from those who had hypoglycemia. So those who had hypoglycemia, this is not something to ignore, because as you can see, it is about 6% in general between the two countries that required to go to hospital, either to be assessed at ER or to be admitted. Now, when you look into the data of the timing of the hypoglycemia, the vast majority obviously have their hypoglycemia in the evening, just between the afternoon, Asr and Maghrib, 3 p.m. to sunset time, Maghrib time. And as the group had also plenty of patients on insulin, it is no wonder that we had a fair number of patients in reflection of the early morning injection having hypoglycemia as well. Hyperglycemia is another serious issue in the region. And in Ramadan, this was also an important point to note. 30% nearly in both countries reported blood glucose levels above 300 milligrams, and the frequency of the days is even higher than the frequency of hypoglycemia, around 8 to 9 days. Now, how many days the individuals had? Well, good 58% had it only between 1 to 7 days, but 22% had it between 8 to 14 days, and another 10 to 12% even more frequent than this. Not everybody who had hyperglycemia would break their fast. It's only a minority who would do, because with hypoglycemia you have to eat, but with hypoglycemia that's not necessarily the case. But still, we see about 4.6% in both countries who needed to go to ER or get an admission to hospital because of hyperglycemia. So in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, the majority of people in the Gulf region fast the month of Ramadan, and indeed many of them also fast the following month, the month of Shawwal. The fasting practices occurs despite many have high glucose levels, advancing age, or multiple comorbidities or diabetes-related conditions. While the majority fasted 30 days, a sizable important minority had to break their fast because of hypo or hyperglycemia. And a small minority of them ended up going to hospital, ER, or a hospital admissions. these rates of fasting, as well as the rates of hypo and hyperglycemia, were higher in Saudi Arabia in comparison to United Arab Emirates. Certainly, we need to have better selection with risk calculation to be able to select those who are less safe in fasting and advise them not to fast while supporting the others to have a better Ramadan. Thank you all, and I hand over to our chairpersons.